December 11, 1941. Hitler's generals file into the Reichstag expecting crisis management. America has just been dragged into the war. Surely the Führer will acknowledge the danger, the industrial colossus, the resource giant across the Atlantic. Instead, Hitler does something that freezes the blood in their veins. He smiles. Then he makes a series of declarations about America. Some were delusional, some seemed strategically sound, and one would become the single biggest miscalculation of the entire war. What did Hitler really say when he declared war on the United States? And why did every word seal Germany's fate? Berlin, December 11, 1941. Gray clouds hang over the German capital like a shroud. Inside the Reichstag building, the air feels thick, oppressive. Generals shift uncomfortably in their seats. High-ranking officials exchange nervous glances. Only 4 days earlier, Japan struck Pearl Harbor. The United States, neutral until that moment, has been thrown into the global conflict. The question on everyone's mind: what will Hitler do? His closest advisors know the reality. Germany is locked in a brutal struggle on the Eastern Front. Soldiers are freezing in Russian snow. Supply lines stretch beyond breaking. The quick victory Hitler promised has evaporated into a grinding war of attrition. Opening another front against a nation with America's resources seems like madness. Yet when Hitler enters the chamber, something is wrong. His expression doesn't match the gravity of the moment. He's not grim. He's not calculating. He's smiling. Hitler walks to the podium. The room falls silent, every eye fixed on him. Then he begins, not with military strategy or geopolitical analysis, but with grand proclamations about destiny. "I can only be grateful to Providence," he declares, "that it entrusted me with the leadership in this historic struggle." He's thanking fate, thanking God, for America entering the war. The room is stunned. This isn't the response anyone expected. Hitler seems energized, even relieved. He speaks of being chosen by history, of Germany's inevitable triumph, of a moment that will define centuries. Then he turns his attention to the United States. His tone sharpens. He describes America as a nation without true unity, a society ruled by competing interests and selfish politicians. He claims the United States has already acted with hostility in the Atlantic, that Germany has been provoked beyond tolerance. He paints America as unprepared, divided, and fundamentally incapable of sustaining a real war. And then, in the moment that will ripple across every continent, Adolf Hitler formally declares war on the United States of America. Radio broadcasts carry his words around the world. In Washington, officials listen in disbelief. In London, Churchill allows himself a grim smile. America is finally fully committed. In Moscow, Stalin calculates what this means for the Eastern Front. And, in frozen trenches across Europe, soldiers on both sides wonder what comes next. But before we dive into what happened after that speech, you need to understand what Hitler actually believed about America. Because his declarations weren't empty rhetoric. They were rooted in deeply held convictions, convictions that would prove catastrophically wrong. Hitler had spent years building a mental picture of the United States. And that picture was dangerously distorted. He saw America as a nation of comfort seekers, people soft from prosperity and consumer goods. He believed democracies couldn't make the hard choices required for total war. Too many debates, too many competing voices, too much chaos. Germany, in his mind, had unity, one vision, one leader, one unstoppable will. America? Just a mess of contradictions. He also looked at the numbers. In 1941, the United States Army ranked 18th in the world, behind Romania. Fewer than 200,000 men were ready for combat. The military budget was small, the readiness was low. So when Hitler stood before the Reichstag that December day, he wasn't bluffing or playing politics. He genuinely believed he understood America. He believed he'd correctly assessed its weaknesses. And his inner circle, eager to please, ideologically aligned, reinforced these beliefs at every turn. What Hitler didn't realize was that he'd built his entire strategy on a foundation of illusions. And those illusions were about to collide with reality in the most devastating way possible. His first major claim about America was perhaps the most delusional. He believed the United States simply couldn't mobilize a real military force. Not quickly enough. Not effectively enough. Let's examine that prediction and see just how wrong one man could be. Hitler's view of America didn't form overnight. It was built over years. Layer upon layer of ideology, prejudice, and selective observation. He had watched American democracy with contempt. To him, the endless debates in Congress, the fierce newspaper editorials, the constant political infighting, all of it proved one thing. Democracies were inherently weak. They couldn't make decisions. They couldn't act with speed or conviction. Germany, by contrast, moved as one. One leader, one vision. No debate to slow things down. Hitler believed this gave Germany an insurmountable advantage. While America argued over budgets and policies, Germany could strike with precision and unity. He was especially dismissive of American culture. The United States, in his eyes, was a nation obsessed with comfort. Cars, refrigerators, movies, maisons. These were people who had grown soft in prosperity. They couldn't endure hardship. They wouldn't sacrifice. When the first body bags came home, he believed, American resolve would collapse. This wasn't just rhetoric. Hitler genuinely thought comfort had made Americans incapable of the brutal discipline required for modern warfare. Then there were the numbers, and they seemed to support his assumptions. In 1941, the U.S. Army was shockingly small. It ranked 18th globally, behind countries like Romania and Portugal. Fewer than 200,000 soldiers were combat ready. Equipment was outdated. Training was limited. The military budget had been slashed throughout the 1930s as America focused inward during the Great Depression. Hitler saw these statistics and drew a simple conclusion. America wasn't a military power. It was an industrial nation pretending to be one. His advisors reinforced these beliefs at every opportunity. Nazi intelligence reports cherry-picked evidence that confirmed what Hitler wanted to hear. Isolationist movements in America were exaggerated. Industrial capacity was downplayed. Cultural weaknesses were highlighted. No one in Hitler's inner circle dared contradict the Führer's worldview. And so the illusions solidified into strategic doctrine. But here's the fatal flaw in Hitler's thinking. He confused political debate with national weakness. He mistook consumer culture for lack of capability. He looked at America's peacetime military and assumed it reflected the nation's true strength. He didn't see, or refused to see, what lay beneath the surface. He didn't understand that America's factories, currently making washing machines and automobiles, could be retooled. He didn't grasp that a nation built on immigration and diversity might possess resilience instead of fragmentation. He didn't recognize that democracies, when truly threatened, could mobilize with terrifying speed. Hitler thought he understood America. He believed he'd studied it, analyzed it, measured it correctly. He had not. And this fundamental misunderstanding, this arrogant certainty, would shape every decision Germany made from December 11th forward. It would dictate military strategy, resource allocation, and diplomatic choices. Hitler's first major prediction, rooted in these beliefs, was about to be tested. He claimed America couldn't build a real army. Not quickly, not effectively. The world was about to discover just how catastrophically wrong he was. In private conversations with his commanders, Hitler laid out his first prediction with absolute confidence. America, he told them, cannot build an army, not a real one. He elaborated with conviction. American society was too fractured, he insisted. Too many competing interests. Labor unions would fight conscription. Isolationists would resist deployment. Regional divisions would prevent national unity. Young Americans, he claimed, had never known discipline. They'd grown up with jazz clubs and movie theaters, not military training and sacrifice. How could a generation raised on comfort suddenly embrace the hardships of war? Hitler pointed to the Great Depression as further evidence. A country that cannot even manage its own economy, he scoffed, thinks it can manage a global war? He expected mobilization to take years, perhaps 5, maybe longer. By then, the war would be over. Russia would have fallen. Britain would have surrendered or been starved into submission. Germany would control Europe from the Atlantic to the Urals. America's entry into the war didn't frighten him, because he believed Germany would win long before America could matter. His generals, unwilling to challenge him, nodded in agreement. What happened instead shocked the world. Within 6 months of Pearl Harbor, the United States had mobilized over 3 million men. Within a year, that number doubled. By 1943, over 11 million Americans wore military uniforms, more than 50 times the size of the 1941 peacetime force. The transformation was staggering. Draft boards processed millions of young men with mechanical efficiency. Training camps sprang up across the country, seemingly overnight. Entire towns watched as their sons, brothers, and fathers boarded trains heading to bases they'd never heard of. The political divisions Hitler had counted on? They evaporated. Pearl Harbor created something he couldn't fathom: instant national unity. Isolationists became interventionists. Labor unions suspended strikes. Regional differences dissolved in the face of a common enemy. The soft American youth Hitler dismissed proved capable of extraordinary endurance. They endured brutal training. They shipped out to distant continents. They fought in deserts, jungles, and frozen mountains. The discipline Hitler claimed they lacked? It emerged rapidly, not from authoritarian tradition, but from shared purpose. The emotional gap between Hitler's prediction and reality was vast. In December 1941, Hitler stood before the Reichstag smiling, certain that American mobilization was impossible, or at least irrelevant. By mid-1942, German intelligence reports began telling a different story. American troop numbers were climbing at an alarming rate. Training programs were expanding. Equipment was being distributed. Hitler initially dismissed these reports as exaggerated. American propaganda, he claimed. Inflated numbers meant to intimidate. But the evidence kept mounting. America wasn't just mobilizing, it was doing so faster than any nation in history. The sleeping giant wasn't stumbling awake groggily. It was rising with purpose and power. Hitler had predicted 5 years. America needed less than 1. He'd counted on disunity. America forged unprecedented solidarity. He'd assumed softness. America demonstrated steel. His first prediction, the one rooted in his deepest convictions about democratic weakness, had proven catastrophically wrong. But Hitler's miscalculations didn't end there. His second prediction addressed a different challenge entirely: distance. And unlike his first claim, this one had real strategic weight. In fact, it nearly came true. Hitler's second prediction was different. This one had teeth. Even if America could mobilize millions of soldiers, he reasoned, they still faced an insurmountable problem: the Atlantic Ocean. 3,000 miles of open water separated American ports from European battlefields. Every bullet, every tank, every gallon of fuel, every soldier, all of it had to cross that vast expanse. And Hitler controlled what lurked beneath those waves. Germany's U-boats, submarines, were the pride of the Kriegsmarine. Sleek, deadly, and devastatingly effective, they'd already proven their worth in the early years of the war. Hitler understood naval warfare. He knew that controlling supply lines could win or lose a conflict. If German submarines could sink merchant ships faster than the Allies could replace them, the entire Allied war effort would collapse. Britain would starve. Russia would run out of supplies. And American troops, even if mobilized, would never reach Europe in meaningful numbers. "Let them build their army," Hitler reportedly told his commanders. "They'll never get it across." The logic was sound. Historically, naval blockades had crippled nations. Geography had always been a limiting factor in warfare. The Atlantic wasn't just an ocean. It was a strategic moat that Hitler believed would protect Fortress Europe. In early 1942, Hitler's prediction appeared prophetic. German U-boats launched a devastating campaign along the American coastline, a period submariners would later call the happy time. Merchant ships burned within sight of American beaches. Torpedoes struck with terrifying regularity. In 1942 alone, German submarines sank over 1,000 Allied ships. The numbers were catastrophic. Oil tankers exploded in flames off the Carolinas. Cargo vessels carrying food, ammunition, and equipment disappeared beneath the waves. Bodies washed ashore. Debris littered harbors. Britain's situation grew desperate. Food rationing intensified. Fuel reserves dwindled. Military supplies ran dangerously low. The Battle of the Atlantic became the longest continuous military campaign of the entire war. And for months, Germany was winning it. Churchill later admitted that the U-boat threat was the only thing that truly frightened him during the war. If the Atlantic supply line collapsed, Britain would fall. And if Britain fell, the war was lost. Hitler watched these results with grim satisfaction. His second prediction, unlike his first, was proving accurate. Distance was destroying them. For a brief, terrifying period, Hitler's strategy seemed unbeatable. German submarines operated with near impunity. Allied convoys suffered horrendous losses. The mathematics of the campaign favored Germany. Ships were being sunk faster than they could be replaced. If this continued, if Germany maintained its naval dominance, the entire Allied cause would suffocate. Hitler had been wrong about American mobilization, but he appeared devastatingly correct about geography. The Atlantic Ocean, he believed, would remain an impenetrable barrier. America's industrial might, no matter how impressive, couldn't overcome basic geography and German naval power. He was so close to being right. But America's answer was unlike anything the world had ever seen. Hitler's third prediction was perhaps his most fatal miscalculation. He believed with absolute certainty that America could never outproduce Germany in war materials. "The American automotive industry," he declared dismissively, "cannot be converted to tank production." In his mind, American factories were fundamentally civilian operations. They made refrigerators, washing machines, automobiles, consumer goods for a consumer society. These were pleasant peacetime products, he reasoned, but they had nothing to do with the brutal machinery of war. Making a passenger car, Hitler insisted, was entirely different from making a tank. Building a household appliance bore no resemblance to manufacturing aircraft engines. The skills didn't transfer, the equipment couldn't adapt, the expertise wasn't relevant. Germany, by contrast, had spent years building a war economy. Its factories were designed for military production. Its engineers specialized in weapons. Its industrial base was optimized for conflict. Hitler looked at Germany's output: tanks rolling off assembly lines, aircraft being produced by the hundreds, submarines under construction, and saw an insurmountable advantage. America might have more factories, he acknowledged, but they were the wrong kind of factories. What Hitler failed to grasp was the fundamental nature of American industrial capacity. American factories weren't just civilian, they were adaptable. The same engineering principles that created efficient automobile assembly lines could be applied to tank production. The same precision manufacturing that built aircraft instruments could produce bomb sights and navigation equipment. And America's industrial capacity wasn't just large, it was largely untapped. While Germany had been operating at near maximum war production since the late 1930s, American factories were still making toasters and radios. The industrial muscle existed. It simply hadn't been flexed yet. Behind the scenes, even as Hitler made his predictions, something remarkable was beginning. Government officials and business leaders were meeting in boardrooms across America. Engineers were sketching conversion plans. Factory managers were calculating timelines. The challenge was clear: transform civilian manufacturing into military production, and do it faster than anyone thought possible. Automotive plants began retooling their assembly lines. Aircraft manufacturers expanded operations exponentially. Shipyards prepared for unprecedented construction schedules. Innovation accelerated. Assembly line techniques pioneered by Henry Ford were adapted for bomber production. Welding methods were revolutionized to speed ship construction. Standardized parts allowed for mass production on a scale never before attempted. Government-business cooperation, typically slow and bureaucratic, operated with wartime urgency. Contracts were signed. Resources were allocated. Priorities were clear. Hitler couldn't see what was coming. He looked at America's peacetime economy and saw weakness. He should have seen potential. He observed consumer factories and assumed limitation. He should have recognized adaptability. He counted Germany's current production numbers and felt confident. He should have been terrified, because what was about to unfold in American factories would rewrite the rules of industrial warfare. It would dwarf anything Germany could achieve. It would supply not just American forces, but Allied armies across multiple continents. The arsenal of democracy was about to demonstrate what happened when American innovation, resources, and determination converged on a single goal. Hitler had predicted America couldn't outproduce Germany. He was about to discover just how catastrophically wrong he was. The first months of 1942 were Germany's most successful period in the Atlantic, and the Allies' darkest hours. German U-boats prowled American coastal waters with devastating effectiveness. They operated so close to shore that submariners could see the glow of city lights illuminating the night sky. Beach resorts, unwilling to implement blackouts, continued their neon displays. Lighthouses kept their beacons rotating. The result was carnage. Merchant ships, silhouetted against the bright coastline, became easy targets. Torpedoes struck without warning. Oil tankers erupted in towering fireballs visible for miles. Cargo vessels carrying vital supplies broke apart and sank within minutes. Survivors clung to wreckage in freezing water. Bodies washed onto vacation beaches. Debris from sunken ships littered the Atlantic seaboard. German submariners called it the happy time. Allied sailors had darker names for it: Across the Atlantic, Britain faced a crisis that threatened its very survival. Food shipments weren't arriving. Rationing grew more severe. The British government calculated they had mere weeks of fuel reserves remaining. Without fuel, factories would shut down. Vehicles would stop. The war effort would grind to a halt. Military supplies dwindled to critical levels. Ammunition stockpiles shrank. Replacement equipment sat in American ports, unable to reach British shores because the ships carrying them kept sinking. Churchill confided to his advisors that if the Battle of the Atlantic was lost, everything else would be irrelevant. No amount of courage or strategy could overcome starvation and material deprivation. The battle stretched month after month, becoming the longest continuous military campaign of the entire war. And for much of it, Germany was winning. German U-boats hunted in coordinated groups called wolf packs. They'd track convoys, communicate via radio, then strike simultaneously from multiple angles. Allied escorts were overwhelmed. Radar technology was primitive. Sonar was unreliable. Aircraft patrols had limited range. Once a convoy was spotted, it was vulnerable. Thus, statistics told a grim story. In 1942, over 1,000 Allied ships were sunk, more than 3 per day. The rate of destruction exceeded the rate of replacement. The mathematics favored Germany. Allied naval commanders privately feared the supply line might collapse entirely. If it did, Britain would fall. If Britain fell, the Allies would lose their staging ground for any future invasion of Europe. Hitler watched these results with deep satisfaction. His second prediction, that distance would destroy American efforts, seemed vindicated. The Atlantic Ocean, patrolled by German submarines, was proving to be an impenetrable barrier. For a moment, genuine victory seemed within reach. The margin between Allied survival and defeat was terrifyingly thin. A few more months of losses at this rate, and Britain's situation would become untenable. Germany didn't need to win decisively. It just needed to maintain pressure long enough for the Allied war effort to collapse from lack of supplies. Hitler's strategy was working. His U-boats were performing exactly as he'd predicted. The Atlantic was becoming Germany's moat, protecting Europe from American intervention. But technological breakthroughs and industrial might would flip the balance. What happened next defied every assumption Hitler had made about American industry. American factories didn't just convert to war production, they exploded into it. Assembly lines that had built Chevrolets and Fords now produced tanks and aircraft engines. Plants that manufactured washing machines retooled for artillery shells. Factories ran 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The hum of machinery never stopped. Women flooded into the workforce by the millions. Rosie the Riveter became more than a symbol. She became the backbone of American production. Women welded ship hulls, assembled aircraft wings, operated heavy machinery, and managed complex manufacturing processes. The scale was staggering. American aircraft production reached levels that seemed impossible. By 1944, American factories were producing over 96,000 aircraft annually, more than Germany and Japan combined. A single factory, Ford's Willow Run plant in Michigan, built one B-24 Liberator bomber every 63 minutes at peak production. These weren't simple machines. Each bomber contained over 1.2 million parts and required 450,000 rivets. Shipyards achieved even more remarkable feats. Liberty ships, cargo vessels designed to replace those sunk by U-boats, were mass-produced using revolutionary techniques. What traditionally took months now took weeks. The record was set in November 1942. One Liberty ship constructed in just under 5 days. America wasn't just replacing ships faster than Germany could sink them. It was building an overwhelming surplus. Entire cities transformed into war production centers. Detroit became the engine of military vehicle production. Seattle churned out bombers. Shipyards in California, Virginia, and Maine worked around the clock. But America didn't just supply its own forces. It supplied everyone. Through the Lend-Lease program, American production fueled the entire Allied war effort. Trucks, tanks, aircraft, food, fuel, ammunition, all flowed from American factories to Allied armies. The Soviet Union received over 400,000 trucks and jeeps. Britain received thousands of aircraft and millions of tons of supplies. American goods reached forces fighting in North Africa, Italy, the Pacific, and across Europe. One statistic captures the scope. By war's end, America had produced roughly 2/3 of all Allied military equipment. Germany, meanwhile, watched its own industrial capacity shrink. Allied bombing campaigns targeted factories. Resources grew scarce. Labor shortages intensified. While American production soared, German output stagnated and then declined. German intelligence reports began arriving with increasingly alarming figures. Hitler initially dismissed them as impossible. American propaganda, he insisted. Exaggerated numbers meant to demoralize Germany. But his military commanders couldn't ignore the evidence. American equipment was appearing on every front: Africa, Italy, the Atlantic, the Pacific. The quantities were overwhelming. Albert Speer, Hitler's Minister of Armaments, studied the production data and understood the terrible truth. Germany could never match this output, not even close. In private meetings, top German officials began acknowledging what Hitler refused to accept. The industrial war was lost. America had proven it could outproduce Germany by margins that weren't just significant. They were insurmountable. The factories Hitler had dismissed as civilian operations were now supplying the largest military force the world had ever seen. His third prediction, that America couldn't outproduce Germany, lay shattered. And the consequences of that miscalculation were about to arrive on the beaches of Normandy. June 6, 1944. The largest amphibious invasion in history began before dawn. Months of planning had led to this moment. Allied intelligence had deceived German command about the invasion location. Engineers had designed specialized landing craft. Thousands of aircraft had been positioned. Mountains of supplies had been stockpiled across southern England. And all of it, every soldier, every vehicle, every bullet, had crossed the Atlantic Ocean that Hitler claimed would be an impenetrable barrier. The numbers were overwhelming. Over 156,000 Allied troops stormed the beaches of Normandy on D-Day alone. Nearly 7,000 naval vessels supported the operation, the largest armada ever assembled. More than 11,000 aircraft provided air cover and support. The equipment represented the full force of American industrial production. Tanks rolled off landing craft. Artillery pieces were positioned on the beaches. Trucks carried supplies inland. Aircraft filled the skies. This wasn't a desperate gamble with limited resources. This was industrial warfare at a scale Germany couldn't comprehend. The Atlantic Wall, Hitler's vaunted coastal defenses, crumbled under the assault. German positions, undermanned and undersupplied, couldn't withstand the coordinated air, sea, and land attack. When reports of the invasion first reached Hitler's headquarters, he refused to believe them. He'd convinced himself the real invasion would come at Calais, not Normandy. He dismissed early reports as a diversion. Even as Allied forces established beachheads and pushed inland, Hitler hesitated to commit reserves. By the time he accepted the truth, the Allies had secured their foothold. The Western Front was opened. Inside German command, the realization spread like cold dread. America was not weak. The soldiers fighting across Normandy demonstrated discipline, training, and resolve. They weren't the soft civilians Hitler had described. They were a formidable fighting force. America was not slow. The mobilization Hitler predicted would take 5 years had happened in less than 1. The buildup of forces in Britain had been massive and rapid. America was not divided. The unity Hitler claimed was impossible was evident in every aspect of the operation. From industrial coordination to military execution to national commitment. Every prediction Hitler made on December 11, 1941, now lay in ruins on the beaches of France. The distance he thought would protect Europe? Overcome by American naval power and industrial output. The production capacity he dismissed? Now evident in every tank, every aircraft, every ship supporting the invasion. The inability to mobilize? Shattered by millions of American soldiers now fighting on European soil. D-Day marked the point of no return. Germany now faced what Hitler had desperately tried to avoid: a two-front war. Soviet forces were crushing German armies in the east. Allied forces were now advancing from the west. German resources, already strained, were stretched beyond capacity. There weren't enough troops, enough equipment, enough fuel to defend both fronts effectively. The industrial might that Hitler claimed Germany possessed was proving inadequate against the combined Allied production, led by the American factories he'd so thoroughly dismissed. His generals knew the truth, even if Hitler refused to accept it. The war was lost. The only question now was how long Germany could delay the inevitable. The confident predictions of December 1941 had become the nightmare of June 1944. And the worst was yet to come. April 1945. Berlin. The city Hitler once envisioned as the eternal capital of a 1,000-year Reich lay in ruins. Buildings burned. Streets were cratered by artillery. The sound of Soviet guns echoed closer each day. Deep beneath the Reich chancellery, in a concrete bunker, Adolf Hitler spent his final days. The Western Allies were advancing from the west. The Soviet army was blocks away, fighting street by street toward the bunker itself. The pincer movement Hitler had feared since December 1941 was now crushing what remained of his empire. Hitler's health had deteriorated dramatically. His hands trembled. His posture was stooped. The man who had stood confidently before the Reichstag 3 years earlier now shuffled through bunker corridors like a shadow. His circle of advisors had shrunk to a handful of loyalists. Most had fled, surrendered, or died. Those who remained offered little but desperate platitudes. Hitler clung to fantasies of miracle weapons that would turn the tide. Super tanks, jet aircraft, wonder weapons that existed only on drawing boards or in prototype form. He spoke of armies that no longer existed, of relief forces that would never arrive, of victory snatched from certain defeat. In private conversations, the bravado was gone. The confidence had vanished. Fear, raw and undeniable, had replaced it. The distance between December 11, 1941 and April 1945 was more than time. It was a gulf between delusion and reality. In 1941, Hitler had smiled as he declared war on America. He'd spoken of destiny, of providence, of inevitable triumph. In 1945, he faced the consequences of that certainty. The nation he'd dismissed as too divided to mobilize had fielded millions of soldiers now occupying German territory. The factories he'd claimed couldn't convert to war production had supplied armies across 3 continents. The Atlantic Ocean he'd believed would protect Europe had become a highway for American power. Every assumption had been wrong. Every prediction had failed. On April 30th, 1945, as Soviet soldiers fought their way through the rubble above, Hitler took his own life in the bunker. Days later, Germany surrendered unconditionally. The Third Reich, which Hitler had proclaimed would last a millennium, had collapsed in 12 years, and the speech he delivered with such pride on December 11, 1941, had accelerated that collapse. One speech, one moment of supreme confidence, one series of catastrophic misjudgments. Hitler's declaration of war on the United States was more than a military decision. It was a revelation of how completely he'd misunderstood the world beyond his ideology. He'd believed democracies were weak, but they proved resilient. He'd assumed comfort meant inability, but America transformed prosperity into power. He'd thought production was destiny, and he was right. But he'd been wrong about who could produce more. The chain reaction that began on December 11, 1941, ended in the ruins of Berlin. Hitler's certainty, his unshakable conviction that he understood America's weaknesses, became the foundation of his downfall. The United States, the nation he'd dismissed as incapable of fighting a real war, stood among the powers that ended the conflict he'd expanded so boldly. History would remember his speech not as a moment of strength, but as the day Hitler sealed his own fate. The day supreme confidence collided with reality, and reality won. What Hitler really said after America entered World War II revealed not just his beliefs about America, but his fundamental inability to see the world as it truly was. And that blindness cost him everything. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories. Each story matters. Each story deserves to be remembered, and we would love to hear from you. Leave a comment below telling us where you are watching from. Our community spans continents and generations. From veterans to history enthusiasts, from students to scholars, you are part of something meaningful here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for keeping these stories